At the same time, our physical relationship, our sex life became less frequent. It became unsatisfactory. And so we'd have this cycle of me being, I would say, what's the matter with me? Why don't you want to make love? And I would confront him. He would resist it, but at some point he would be contrite and he would apologize and he would promise he would change. But within a week or two, he would slide back into his behavior of avoiding me. He would go to bed, and when he was in bed, I was not to bother him. So I was forced to go back to work, and because I did not find satisfaction or affirmation inside of our marriage, I began to look outside of our marriage and our home for affirmation, not for, sexual affirmation or emotional, but job performance. I became a superstar at work. Everybody thought that I was wonderful. And I went through some leadership programs. I eventually became an elected official. And I really satisfied my needs for affection and admiration by getting it outside of our family. But I kept all of this very private. I never told anyone what I was going through. First of all, if you're an elected official, you're not going to tell anybody anything because you need to be inspirational. You need to be able to be a leader. You can't have issues. But also imagine trying to get elected if you have opponents who can use that for oppo research. So I didn't tell anybody because I felt so vulnerable. Over the years, Rich saw a few counselors, and frankly, they all put the blame mostly on me because I gained weight. Sometimes they would put the blame a little bit on him. I remember one counselor said, well, the problem is that when you watch TV, you're over here in your recliner and she's over there in hers. So I want you to get a love seat where you sit together and watch TV together, hold her hand, et cetera, et cetera. The guy was clueless. So I would ask him, go to the doctor, get your hormone levels tested, see if there's something there. And he would come back from the doctor and he'd say, there's nothing wrong with me. Well, that left me with nothing else to think, but it's my fault. And he wanted me to think that it was my fault. I didn't have a husband. I couldn't share anything with him. I had no emotional connection with him. We were roommates. Hey guys, welcome to Where to Find Bread. I'm your host, Teri Murrison. When you're betrayed by someone you love, when life takes away your identity and your plans, you still get to choose your values, your peace, and your next step. I'm here to tell you that even when everything falls apart, you don't quit, you recalibrate because all is not as it seems. Season 2 is about that, about seeing the truth and having faith and the courage to begin again, about surviving, healing, and choosing joy anyway. Season 2 was born when my pretending stopped and the mask dropped. Betrayal will shrink your world, but it doesn't get to define it. I'm glad you're here. Please follow along with me as we go through my discovery and healing journey, as we learn about attachment and betrayal trauma, personal growth, resilience, and empowerment, restoration, and joy. Please drop down below and like, subscribe, and share this so we can get the word out to others who are struggling so no one has to walk this road alone. Let's get into the next episode now. Today, we have an episode that I have not been looking forward to recording. I'm going to share the backstory, and it's a sensitive topic because really the things that I'm going to tell you, I've forgiven my husband Rich for, but they really um, paint him in a pretty bad light. And so what I want you to know is that we are good now, as poorly as it reflects on him. That was a different Rich. And so just go ahead and think whatever you will of him now, but just know that you will hear the rest of the story coming up. This is my backstory. This has been a long road for me. I was adopted from birth. I spent a lot of time in the hospital, in foster care, and I didn't end up going to my parents' home until I was 6 months old. So I had a lot of attachment issues. If you're not familiar with attachment issues, when an infant fails in the first year of life to form a secure bond with their caretaker, whether that's a parent or a foster parent, they have trouble later on in life forming secure bonds with other adults and children. I did. Grew up and I had a series of, well, all of my relationships growing up were difficult. I didn't know until I was 50 years old, and maybe someday I'll tell you that story. But I didn't know that I was insecurely attached to everyone. I didn't trust anyone. I craved closeness. I craved connection, but at the same time, I pushed it away. Some of you will probably remember that. When I was in high school and after I graduated, I was involved in drugs and sex, anything for acceptance. I thought that I really thought, I swear, I thought that if you had sex with a boy, you had a better chance of getting a boyfriend. And I really wanted a boyfriend because I wanted somebody to love me and care for me. I was raised in the Baptist church and I didn't like the kids at church. I put God off. I put my parents off. I put everybody off. And I made a series of bargains with God that if he would leave me alone for, I don't know, a series of years so I could drive um, with a license, if I could vote, if I could go to a bar, as silly as that sounds, legally, I would then turn and go to church and be a goody goody. Well, when I was 23, I had lived a very unhappy life, and I had really gone to the end of my rope, and everything in my life fell apart. One night, I was crying in my apartment and I just asked God, I said, one final bargain. Okay. Send somebody to me that has a similar background that I can go back to church with, and I'll be a goody goody just like you want me to, and I'll go back to church. Well, 3 days later, I met Rich, and I knew I knew that he was God's answer for me. So I knew that we were going to get married. I just did. I I don't know why, but I didn't ask him for anything. I didn't ask him, when am I going to see you again? I didn't ask him to tell me he loved me. I knew that I did not want to scare him away because he was God's answer to my prayer. Well, 3 years went by and I was still not asking him for anything, and he was not really giving me much but a good time. He was going to graduate from college and he was moving to the Northwest. And we were talking, and he wanted, well, I was not talking, he was talking. He wanted to know why I was so quiet. And I said, well, you're going to move away and I don't know if I'll ever see you again. And I'm sad. And he was quiet for a very long time, a very long time. And he said, well, I guess we could, you could go with me. And I had this restraint that I couldn't have imagined that I would have. I knew it wasn't me. And I said, are you intending that we marry? And he said, no, I thought we'd live together. And I said, I can't do it. I can't go. He was quiet. He was very, very quiet. And he said, well, I guess we could get married then. But he didn't want me to tell anyone until the summertime. And it was months away. Well, I agreed, but then I told everybody. I told my parents, I told my friends. I was so happy that this man that I really thought that he loved me, I loved him. It was meant to be. We were going to get married. We were going to be happy. He was living hours to the north from me. And so I saw him about every 5 weeks. I knew that when we lived together in the same house in the same town, that was going to change. He was going to be affectionate. He was going to be accessible. We were going to spend time together. It was going to be everything that I dreamed. Well, in the process, during those 3 years, I had transformed myself from what I used to be, which was overweight and I was attractive, but I wasn't probably, it didn't look like the women in the posters of his apartments. He had these posters of women in his apartment, these blonde nymphets who were out in nature in these very short shirts and looking seductive. And over the 3 years, I lost weight and I really became quite attractive. I lightened my hair. And I really started to look like those women on the walls. But he didn't really affirm me very much for doing that. He didn't really accept or say much about it. So we got married and we moved to Spokane, Washington together. And the beginning that I thought that we would have didn't materialize. The weekend that we got married, we were out in a restaurant and I can still see the room. I can see the table where we were sitting. He told me that I didn't satisfy him sexually, that it just wasn't a good experience for him. And I was crushed. I was just literally crushed that this man would tell me such a thing. But I put it off. We moved to Spokane and we began our life together. The first year of our marriage was just hell. I was very employable. I was a legal secretary and it was very easy for me to get a job. And so uh, I uh, would go to work. He couldn't find a job anywhere and I missed him. And so I would call him up and I would say, "What are you doing? What's going on?" He would get angry at me because he said that I was checking up on him, that I was making him feel guilty. I went to the grocery store and I bought more groceries than he would have. He looked at the receipts. He yelled at me for the things that I bought. There was a lot of anger, a lot of things that he didn't like. He had told me the reason he wanted to marry me was because I was easy to be with. Now he told me I was not easy to be with. And he said I had tricked him into marrying him. Well, I was stunned. He, I felt tricked too. He wasn't affectionate. He wasn't any of the things that I'd hoped for, but I still loved him. Over the years, we were married and with that kind of relationship, I started to gain weight. My low self esteem was really terrible. I was lonely. He didn't want to have friends really. So I got sort of isolated from friends. And I thought, I really want a child. And he had always told me, "I'm not having a child. I don't want a child." He would say, "I had a child. He's perfect. I don't need another child." Well, I would think, what about me? I want a child. But I asked and asked, and I prayed for 10 years. I wanted a child desperately. And then 10 years later, he suddenly decided that he would give me a child. And I was off of work for probably the first year. And then our finances were very difficult because I was always the primary breadwinner. He would have a job, but then he would only work so much and he would decide that he was working enough and that I could do the rest. He would require me to go back to work when I had a 1-year-old baby at home, and he would stay home with her. He didn't feel a responsibility to support us. So while he did work, he took on a few extra classes. He really put the majority of the responsibility for our support onto my shoulders. At the same time, our physical relationship, our sex life became less frequent. It became unsatisfactory. And so we'd have this cycle of me being, I would say, what's the matter with me? Why don't you want to make love? And I would confront him. He would resist it, but at some point he would be contrite and he would apologize and he would promise he would change. But within a week or two, he would slide back into his behavior of avoiding me. He would go to bed, and when he was in bed, I was not to bother him. So I was forced to go back to work. And because I did not find satisfaction or affirmation inside of our marriage, I began to look outside of our marriage and our home for affirmation, not for sexual affirmation or emotional, but job performance. I became a superstar at work. Everybody thought that I was wonderful. And I went through some leadership programs. I eventually became an elected official, and I really satisfied my needs for affection and admiration by getting it outside of our family. But I kept all of this very private. I never told anyone what I was going through. First of all, if you're an elected official, you're not going to tell anybody anything because you need to be inspirational. You need to be able to be a leader. You can't have issues, but also imagine trying to get elected if you have opponents who can use that for oppo research. So I didn't tell anybody because I felt so vulnerable. Over the years, Rich saw a few counselors, and frankly, they all put the blame mostly on me because I gained weight. Sometimes they would put the blame a little bit on him. When I remember one counselor said, well, the problem is that when you watch TV, you're over here in your recliner and she's over there in hers. So I want you to get a love seat where you sit together and watch TV together, hold her hand, et cetera, et cetera. The guy was clueless. So I would ask him, go to the doctor, get your hormone levels tested, see if there's something there. And he would come back from the doctor and he'd say, there's nothing wrong with me. Well, that left me with nothing else to think, but it's my fault. And he wanted me to think that it was my fault. I didn't have a husband. I couldn't share anything with him. I had no emotional connection with him. We were roommates. One time in particular, I remember we had a confrontation and I said, I want you to tell me, what is it about me that you do not want me? Why do you not want me? And he looked very pained and he hemmed and hawed. And then he looked at me and he said, I know how much you weigh. Wow. I was devastated. So over the years, I had been treated like if I just changed something, he would find me acceptable. And he allowed me to think that. I would go on the internet and I would try to find what do you think the cause could be? Even though on some level, I felt like I had caused it. I also felt like this can't just be me. Here I'm, 30, 40 years into this marriage, and it can't just be all me. It's got to be part him. But no. So, too embarrassed to talk about it. I couldn't tell a friend because I didn't have any. I was isolated. And frankly, that's where I was when we had Discovery Day. Now, Discovery Day is what people frequently talk about when there's been a betrayal that's been revealed. Discovery Day is the day that secrets are out and the spouse discovers what the partner has been hiding. Living with somebody who's sex addicted and has intimacy anorexia is really like being in a slow motion train wreck. So if you can imagine the slow motion train wreck that went on for 40 years, even after I discovered what it was, I didn't know how to deal with it. And finally, I went to a group after the discovery, and a woman handed me a book and she said, I think if you read this, you'll get all your questions answered and you'll understand. And we're going to go through that. We're going to have a counselor who's going to talk about intimacy anorexia. You're going to understand. But I bet that right now, you know someone who is in that same place, or maybe it's you, but I bet you don't know it. I bet you don't. I didn't even know it. Please, for that person and maybe for yourself, I wish you would share this episode with them, whether you know it or not. Next time, on the next episode, I'm going to bring in Rich. I call him the professor. And I'm going to let him tell you how it felt to be him during those same 44 years and before. His was no cakewalk either. We were both miserable. Please don't miss episode 3. I really appreciate you being here for episode 2. I hope it wasn't too morose and that you didn't think I was wah-wah-wahing again. We have moved on from discovery. We have moved beyond disclosure, which is the process where the betrayer admits to the spouse, the partner, all of the things that he or she has been doing that have not been conducive to a good marriage relationship. We have moved beyond that. They're in recovery, have moved to there's a part of the recovery process where both partners begin to make meaning of what's happened and begin to turn the reality of what's happened into a positive from a deeply flawed negative. So please don't miss episode 3 because I think it's really important to understand Rich before we go on to talking to the other folks. I really am so glad that you're with us. I hope this speaks to you. And if it's you that I'm talking to, reach out. Reach out to a counselor. We have recovery resources on the website, and I'd love to see you get free. And certainly, if you have been betrayed, it is not your fault. It wasn't my fault. Certainly, I had many faults. But betrayal is not the fault of the person who gets betrayed. Ever. Take care. Thanks for joining me today for another episode of Where to Find Bread. If you're looking for clarity, healing, or meaningful change after your world's been turned upside down by betrayal trauma, start here, where we share real experience, honest conversations, and practical paths forward. Listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our newsletter and read the blog at https://wheretofindbread.us. Or if you're a man who's been betrayed or betrayed your partner, work with Rich. We're also now available to speak to groups of any size, anywhere. Check it out on our website or contact support at wheretofindbread.us. Whether you've been betrayed or you betrayed someone else, our work meets you where you are without shame as you move toward peace, joy, healing, and change. You don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to walk this thing alone. Thanks for listening. See you next time.